Good afternoon. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 22019 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a change to tomorrow's business. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Liz Smith to move the motion. Liz Smith, please.
Moved.
Thank you very much. No member is asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 22019 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. Can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus? And can I ask you to take care to observe these measures over the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the Chamber? I know it's said every day, but it can't be said often enough. Next item of business is a statement by Fergus Ewing on COVID-19 tourism. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruption. And I call on Fergus Ewing. Cabinet Secretary, please.
Presiding Officer, the current situation with COVID-19 is one of the biggest challenges we have faced in our lifetimes. Preservation of life has been our overriding objective since the start of this crisis. It's that simple. By staying at home and following the physical distancing guidance, the people of Scotland are doing everything they can to protect our NHS, our social care services, and to save lives. However, the measures we have taken and are continuing to take to deal with this crisis reflect its magnitude. We have had to implement restrictions on liberties which have had a very serious impact on our economy, and our tourism and hospitality sector has been devastated. I understand how difficult this is. Businesses have gone from anticipating another bumper tourism season this summer to seeing their income drop to zero almost overnight. Presiding Officer, the Scottish and UK governments have moved quickly to try to address the financial challenges faced by businesses affected by the current crisis, including those in the tourism and hospitality sector. The Scottish Government has provided a package of support worth over £2.3 billion, going above and beyond the UK Government consequentials. We have provided rates relief, developed grant schemes not available elsewhere in the UK, and we have met with and listened to businesses to understand where gaps still exist. Since the middle of March, I myself have spent much of my time taking part in calls with sectoral organisations and business owners to hear firsthand the impact the restrictions are having. Many taking part in these calls have suffered the most severe impacts upon their lives and their livelihoods. I would like to commend the work of organisations like the Scottish Tourism Alliance and UK Hospitality in representing their sectors and providing a vital bridge between the Scottish Government and businesses. We have worked in partnership to ensure that the UK Government understands the pressures on the industry in Scotland. That work is not completed. Kate Forbes and I have written to the Chancellor to request a discussion on how we can work together further to support the sector and alleviate some of the pressures on businesses, including through a review of VAT rates. The UK Government must lead on a financial recovery plan for tourism in the UK with significant funding attached, and we will use those consequentials for the industry in Scotland. From my numerous discussions with industry over the past weeks and months, I know what the industry needs now is clarity on when it will be able to reopen and start on the long road back to sustainability and growth. I fully understand the unique challenges the uncertainty is creating. Businesses need to know what orders to place and when. They need to have more confidence to take bookings whilst understanding the risks inherent in the continued presence of the virus. To take bookings, they need to be able to plan staff rotas and shifts and to restock, and they need to be in a position of readiness to go once restrictions are lifted and avoid any unnecessary delays. Some businesses may also wish to pre-purchase PPE equipment. Visitors also need time to request annual leave and to make bookings. Notice, preparedness and readiness go hand in hand and are a key part of preparing for recovery. The Scottish Government understands the exceptional and very challenging circumstances facing our tourism and hospitality sector. It is heavily dependent on seasonality, meaning the already limited opportunities are narrowing by the day. Many businesses are facing key decisions on their future with all the implications for jobs and investment. It is an unenviable position by any measure. I don't seek to underplay the impact this crisis is having on all parts of Scotland's economy. It is, Presiding Officer, profound. But these facts do set this sector apart, and this needs to be recognised. We have heard the messages clearly, and we are not impervious to the sector's calls for more clarity. Our responsibility is to balance the exceptional circumstances of the industry with the need to continue to take the right steps at the right time to protect life. Let us remember, COVID-19 has not gone away, and it remains a threat. However, I am keen to give additional clarity where possible and to provide an indicative date from which we hope the sector can begin to operate. This cannot be definitive. The science and health advice must be in the right place. The virus must have been suppressed. The test and protect system must be used effectively, and our route map must be on course. Given the vital interdependencies between the tourism and hospitality sector and the wider sectors of the economy, including public transport, we must make holistic decisions about when to change restrictions. We cannot make changes for any sector, Presiding Officer, in isolation. This is why we must be assured that the epidemic is suppressed to enable the more general opening up of our country that will come with the reopening of tourism and hospitality, so that everyone, employees, tourists, customers, can be confident that it's safe to make this change. Statutory reviews of the current restrictions are required on 18th June and 9th July. Those reviews must take place, and the outcomes of them must show the necessary progress in our fight against the virus for tourism to resume. As things stand just now, our hope is that we will be able to give the go-ahead to a reopening of the sector at the 9th July review. Assuming this does prove possible, some time would then be required for interconnected services such as transport to prepare. On that basis, and on the clear understanding with the industry that nothing can be absolutely guaranteed at this stage, and that we may need to change this date if the evidence requires it, we would encourage tourism and hospitality businesses to prepare within appropriate safety guidelines for reopening on the 15th July. For the reasons I've set out, this timetable is by necessity both provisional and conditional, but we very much hope it can be met, and that setting it out now, even with caveats, gives the sector greater clarity and some much needed ability to plan ahead. And I can't stress enough how important it is for the time until then to be used to implement the changes that are necessary to satisfy regulations and adapt to a new way of living. On that, I will say something about this new way of life, because things will not be the same as before. COVID-19 has changed that, and safety must come first. I can therefore also announce, Presiding Officer, that we will soon be publishing guidance for the tourism and hospitality sector that will help businesses make the necessary changes. We've worked closely with industry in this area, and this will provide a key link between government and the good work done across the sector to prepare guidelines and practical measures for safe reopening. It will mean things will look and feel different, and this is also a challenge for businesses. Workplaces will need to adapt and innovate to make best use of space and facilities within the guidelines. There will be a key role for industry in building confidence in communities who may understandably be hesitant to welcome back visitors. Customers, us, the public, will also need to adapt to new ways of using these services, just as we have had to do throughout the crisis. But I do have confidence that everyone will, once again, rise to that challenge. I accept this is disruptive and difficult, but the measures are, however, essential to ensure workplaces are safe and compliant, and in keeping with our fair work principles, they have been developed in partnership with trade unions and the appropriate regulatory bodies. It will give confidence to employers, employees, customers and the public that Scotland's tourism and hospitality sector is prepared and ready to once again provide safe, reliable and enjoyable experiences. Presiding Officer, if I may make one final announcement before I finish, I want to highlight today that I'm setting up a Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force to take forward strategic oversight of and provision of advice on recovery plans in response to COVID-19 and its impact on tourism and hospitality. This task force will be responsible for ensuring the tourism recovery plan is fully coordinated with wider Scottish Government and other recovery plans. It will also take into account wider actions being taken by the UK Government, other devolved administrations and of international best practice, including of the EU. I will chair this task force along with my colleague, the Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills, Jamie Hepburn. I'll announce the membership shortly. We are in the process of seeking to finalise this and publish a draft work plan for the group, which will include looking at the recovery needs for the sector, working with devolved administrations and the UK Government on UK-level interventions, developing a domestic visitor marketing campaign, and crucially, clear public messaging around the safe recovery of tourism and the economic benefits for our communities. It will work closely with the sector, allowing us to identify the key actions necessary for a strong and safe recovery. Presiding Officer, at the start of March, 3 months ago, I was involved in the launch of Scotland's new tourism strategy, taking us through to 2030. That strategy sought to make Scotland the world leader in 21st century tourism. That should still be our ambition. Scotland has a wealth of assets and a wonderful reputation as a welcoming country. The COVID-19 crisis has been devastating for the industry, but we must look to rebuild the sector and to begin welcoming visitors once again. We recognise that in order to achieve that, businesses must be ready to go when safe to do so and to avoid any unnecessary delay, inflicting yet more reputational and financial harm. Today's further clarity on when that may happen will help avoid that and assist them to be ready to reopen. Under the guidance of the new Tourism Task Force and with the incredible dedication and hard work of the thousands who work in tourism and hospitality, both in the public and private sectors, I believe that we can make a strong and a safe recovery. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Now, time is tight, so I've only around 20 minutes for questions. Then I'm going to move on to the next item of business. Can I ask you to press your request to speak buttons now if you wish to ask a question? Call on Rachel Hamilton, to be followed by Claire Baker. Ms Hamilton, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I draw members to my register of interests. Cabinet Secretary, I welcome the first COVID-19 statement as an update for the tourism industry. I welcome the launch of the task force. We must restart the engines of our economy whilst controlling and managing the flare of the virus. Some parts of the tourism industry are ready to open, others are not. Further clarity is needed to bring everyone on the journey, leaving nobody behind. Cabinet Secretary, self-caterers have been knocked back time and time again by this SNP government during the pandemic. There has been a lack of funding for this sector since the start of lockdown, and their initial eligibility from the criteria on support grants was unfair and damaging. When assessing self-catering units, they are undoubtedly the most appropriate forms of accommodation that could open safely in the future, as the majority of self-catering units have no shared facilities and represent the least risk. This is evident from the Association of Scotland Self-Catering Service survey published yesterday. 75% of self-caterers said they could open safely in phase 2 if travel restrictions are eased and robust cleaning guidance provided, and 42% of respondents say SNP government support for self-catering has been poor or very poor. Concerningly, almost half of businesses are somewhat or very pessimistic about the future. I have 2 points to raise with the Cabinet Secretary.
Ms Hamilton, you'll have to be quick because you've eaten into your time. So one question, please.
Will the Scottish Government enable certain parts of the tourism economy to open sooner than has been stated in today's statement? And secondly, what evaluation has the Scottish Government given to consider...
Sorry, you took too long. Ms Hamilton, stop. You had 1 minute 30 seconds and you ate right into it. So you've got one question. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I was having a little bit of difficulty in making out every word that Hamilton said, and That may be to do with the sound system. So if I apologise if I don't answer the points that she raises. Could I say that my colleagues and I are working around the clock to provide financial support to businesses, not to restore lost revenue, that would be impossible, to provide a bridge to mitigate the hardship that they are suffering to get them through this period. We are straining every sinew to do that. We're doing it round the clock, and we're determined to do our very best. And I'm bound to point out that in the cases of some of the support, we're providing support over and above what our colleagues and friends down south have provided. For example, the Pivotal Fund for businesses, including tourism and hospitality businesses, does provide an element of grant support for businesses with a rateable value of over £51,000. Now, that doesn't happen down south. So every single business, and there's a great many of them who've received vital support from this fund, are receiving support because we recognise that they're vital to tourism around the country, in particular in rural towns and important businesses. So I absolutely do refute the suggestions the Tories have made, and I do find it a bit disappointing at a time when we're trying to work constructively with the UK government that that should be the apparent course that the Scottish Conservatives decide to take.
Thank you. Claire Baker, to be followed by Bruce Crawford. Ms Baker, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The sector will welcome the announcement today of a proposed date for reopening. It's a sector that's been very hard hit by this period. I have some questions. Can I ask when we'll get more detail and when the guidance will be published? It isn't clear if the proposal is for a blanket reopening or if we can look at a phased opening that would recognise different types of risk with different types of accommodation. It's not clear how extensive the relaxation will be. Will this include campsite facilities, and does hospitality also mean bars and restaurants and cafes? And is the government considering a regional or a zonal approach which would maybe help restrict the spread of the virus? The supply chain has also suffered, and I'm getting reports that many have been turned down for the Perth support, which the Cabinet Secretary mentioned. When will we know how this money has been awarded and who has benefited? Presiding Officer, as a date has now been announced, when can people book with confidence and what security will they have when they make a booking? And finally, there is a need for financial support, and I support the calls for the UK Government to step in and support the UK economy. But what priority will there be in the Scottish Budget, which is upcoming in autumn, for tourism and hospitality, recognising its importance to the Scottish economy?
Cabinet Secretary, I appreciate there's a lot of questions in that. If you could answer them succinctly, please. Thank you.
Been working very closely with industry and involving the trade unions in order to devise a measures guidance which we have now completed. We've put that to the relevant health officials. We're aiming to publish that on the 18th of June. That will provide a sufficient period for preparations to be made. For example, preparing premises to adapt for social distancing. For example, ordering in PPE. For example, instructing staff in the safe operation of their work. In relation to the funding packages, we are working very hard with the enterprise agencies to administer the Pivotal and the Creative and Tourism Hardship Funds. Lots of businesses have benefited, lots more will benefit yet. That is work in progress. Once it's completed, we will publish the results consistent with what we can make public about individual businesses, and I would expect full details to be published. In addition, our local authorities have been working hard to administer the rates-based grant scheme, and I know that businesses have availed themselves of the CBILS scheme, the UK loan scheme, and therefore all of that work is in hand. I think that covered several of the questions, and I'll come back to the member if I've omitted any.
Thank you. I have 13 members wishing to ask questions. Unless we are very succinct, we're not going to get through them all. Bruce Crawford, followed by Peter Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the vital contribution that tourism makes to the economy and the well-being of people in my constituency of Stirling. Alan Smith and myself have been undertaking a series of discussions with tourism-related businesses. Many of these businesses are deeply anxious and concerned about what the future might hold. Seasonal operators are facing what, in effect, is 3 winters in a row. Cabinet Secretary, can you therefore tell me what priority the Scottish Government is given to providing additional assistance and what urgent discussions it's had with the UK Government in this regard. Businesses desperately need to know that further grant assistance will be forthcoming.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I am well aware that Mr Crawford represents a constituency that contains some of the most popular tourist attractions in Scotland, in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park, a park that she shares in political terms with Jackie Baillie, from whom I expect we'll hear later. And therefore it's absolutely vital to Mr Crawford and his constituents that we do our best to help those businesses financially. I think we have done a great deal, and I know that the support has been welcome where received, and I hope that it will serve the purpose of providing that bridge across this period. But it is not yet enough, and that's why Kate Forbes has written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer yesterday, outlining what we believe is the need for consideration of further support. And I believe that that further support must be provided. I don't believe it's yet possible, Presiding Officer, to specify precisely how that support lies, but it is well known that many businesses in tourism in Scotland who are dependent on making most of their money between May and October will need help to get through to next spring. I think that's just an incontrovertible fact. And that fact then dictates the level of support that will be required to prevent these businesses from going to the wall, as losing the benefit of the skills of the chefs, the staff, the workforce involved, and ceasing to be the vibrant, successful, attractive nation that so many people in the world enjoy visiting.
Yes, could I mean, I really will. I'm sorry, I know it's very important. We can have shorter answers and questions, so we're going to get through nobody. This rate, Peter Chapman, followed by Alec Neil.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, the tourist industry will be delighted that a date for reopening has now been made. However, we know that there will be huge challenges travelling to their chosen destination. Travel on trains and buses is hugely constrained, and places are probably less than 15% of what would normally be available. And even more worrying is travel to the islands, where ferry capacity will be hopelessly inadequate to allow tourists to travel in decent numbers. So how can the Cabinet Secretary reassure the industry that people will be able to safely travel to enjoy a holiday in July?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm pleased that there is some support from the Conservative Party for the measures that we've announced today and the conditional indicative date of the 15th of July. I do share his concerns that public transport will of necessity be constrained because of the requirement to comply with social distancing. And that measure, of course, is a view that's shared across these islands. The fact that we've made this announcement today, and I'm working with my colleagues Michael Matheson and Paul Wheelhouse, means that we can use this time in order to make the necessary practical arrangements to do our very best to meet the challenges that Mr Chapman has described, which are very real challenges. They can't be magicked away. So we simply must work hard with all relevant bodies, including CalMac, to do the very best possible in a very short space of time. So this work will be absolutely critical over the coming days and weeks.
Thank you. Alec Neil, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement? And I can say we need to do two things. Obviously, help businesses and create demand at the same time. On the latter point, will the Cabinet Secretary consider formally requesting the UK Government and, if required, the EU Commission to allow a suspension of value-added tax for the tourism and hospitality sector for at least a year to allow it and facilitate it to get back on its feet?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I think there's a strong case to have a suspension of VAT or a reduction. I have raised this with the UK Government, in fact, just yesterday, in one of a series of calls that I've had with Nigel Huddleston, the UK Tourism Minister. I have to say, Presiding Officer, he's a very constructive person to deal with on a factual basis. I think he understands the damage to tourism. I understand that he's made 15 asks of the Chancellor. He's going to share those asks with us, so he said yesterday in our phone call, and the answers. It will be very interesting to see both of those documents, and I hope that we can continue to have an open and constructive dialogue and consider, as other countries, I think like Germany and possibly Ireland, looking at VAT reduction in these exceptional times.
Thank you. Colin Smith, followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that there does remain some unspent funds from the rates-based grant schemes that he referred to. So can I ask him if the Government will consider allowing local councils to retain those unallocated resources from the property grant schemes and use them for a flexible local discretionary grant scheme similar to the scheme up and running in local authorities in England to allow them to support businesses, particularly within hospitality, who have so far lost out in grants?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's not yet possible, as I understand it, to determine to what extent there will be an underspend of the grant funds in particular. I hope that that will be clear shortly. However, I think it's right that money intended to provide mitigation of financial hardship for businesses in tourism, whether they be B&Bs, hotels, visitor attractions or coaches who provide a vital service, or indeed wholesalers who are providing food and drink to the on sector, all should have access to some kind of financial bridge over this period. And I think that any spare money that is available should be used primarily for these purposes.
Rona Mackay, followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Many constituents who own caravans have contacted me to ask if they could start using them either on-site or mobile. They argue that they won't be mixing with other households and would adhere to all the COVID-19 health advice. Can the Cabinet Secretary indicate when this might be possible, and how can MSPs and the tourism industry support building of confidence in communities so that they're ready to welcome back tourists when the time is right?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, the case has been well made both by businesses and by individual owners of static or fixed unit caravans and caravan sites for precisely the reasons the member states. Yes, they have a very strong case. The issue, though, is really travelling to and from caravan sites. So why we've suggested the 15th of July, because that's when we anticipate that general travel restrictions can be lifted. It's at that point, and only that point, that accommodation, whether it be in a hotel, self-catering, caravan or B&B, can be opened up. And we recognise that for some self-catering and fixed unit caravans, it's easier to comply with social distancing perhaps than other types of accommodation, but the need for general travel restrictions to be lifted, it trumps those particular concerns and means that all accommodation providers should aim towards the 15th of July as the date. Secondly, yes, there is a need for a marketing campaign. I think that many members of the public at the moment are worried about people coming into their area, particularly parts of Scotland which haven't been perceived as being affected by the virus. In order to assuage these fears, it's vital that the Scottish Government has a marketing campaign to put those fears to rest, to say that safety is paramount, to explain all the work we've been doing in respect of the overarching guidance that we aim to publish on the 18th of June. All of that work is being done, will be published, and I hope will be effective.
John Finney, followed by Mike Rumbles.
And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his statement and welcome the provisional and conditional nature of the progress outlined. Cabinet Secretary will be aware that CalMac are operating their essential lifeline timetable with significant restraints. 17% of passenger capacity, 91% of car deck capacity. A shorter timetable would take 4 weeks to turn around in a transition to a full timetable, which for some we offer it would take 8 to 10 weeks. Can the Cabinet Secretary assure our resident island population that the understandable wish to restart the tourist industry won't in any way disadvantage those relying on the existing essential lifeline timetable service?
Did you manage to get that, Cabinet Secretary? It's quite difficult sound, so if you didn't, I'll perhaps just ask if you can send it in.
The last sentence?
OK, if you've got something you can answer on that.
Could you repeat the last sentence?
Sorry, Mr Finn,
sorry,
could you repeat it?
Officer, I couldn't hear the last sentence of which was contained the question.
Yes, sorry, could you repeat it? The sound was a bit poor. Last sentence with the question, please.
Okay. Thank you. Can the Cabinet Secretary assure our resident island population that the understandable wish to restart the tourist industry won't in any way disadvantage those relying on the existing essential lifeline timetable service?
That's fine. Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I apologise, Mr Finney. I just didn't quite catch the last sentence. But yes, I think we can provide that assurance. Obviously, the ferry service is vital for residents, as it is a vital means for tourists to visit our islands, and we're working very hard to make sure that both groups can be accommodated.
I'd just like the members wait to be. I'm going to let us run on until 10 past on the questions. So I call Mike Rumbles, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Liberal Democrats welcome the target date of the 15th of July. It's immensely helpful to the industry. But would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that self-catering businesses, by definition, have much less interaction with people than hotel or B&B businesses? Could they not open a little earlier?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's a very fair point, and we've engaged with the self-catering sector, in particular Fiona Campbell, throughout all this. The point has been made by many, including Mr Rumbles now, and he is right that it is in some ways easier to protect and comply with the COVID guidance and rules in a self-catering establishment than in certain types of hotel accommodation. But, and this is the but, and this is why we are having all accommodation providers able to open up on the 15th of July, subject to the science being with us. It's for this reason that for people to travel to and from a hotel self-catering unit from elsewhere in Scotland or the UK, that travel cannot be enabled until that phase of tackling the virus. It's for that reason. It's lifting the general travel restriction that governs the timing of the decision that we've made, whilst perfectly recognising that Mr Rumbles makes a very fair point that some accommodation providers will find it easier to comply with social distancing than others, but none of them will be entitled to operate and provide accommodation unless they can all comply with social distancing.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Alistair Allen.
Could I thank the Cabinet Secretary for our very helpful discussions with tourism and hospitality businesses in my constituency. Sadly, as many as 1,200 permanent jobs and 800 seasonal jobs may be lost in the national park. So on that basis, will the Cabinet Secretary ensure that both governments work together to ensure that we have a reshaped job retention scheme in place beyond October? And will he also ensure that there is someone from the Loch Lomond area on his task force?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I used to stay in Loch Lomond for a while, so that might work. that wasn't the answer she was expecting, I think. No, I can assure Jackie Bailey that just yesterday I did raise this point with Nigel Huddleston and suggested that a sort of limited, refined, partial furlough may well be required for many businesses to survive the next spring. He agreed in principle that this is a problem that needs to be looked at. There was support, I think also from the Welsh administration for this argument, yes. We will give very careful and due consideration to the membership of the task force, as Jackie Bailey would expect.
Thank you. Alistair Allen, followed by Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Any dates for the resumption of tourism will on the islands, of course, be dependent not merely on ferry capacity, but on what the public health advice is about whether ferries should be used. My constituents have been, to their great credit, but also to their great sacrifice in many cases, staying away from the ferry for months, and their own needs, well, I'm sure you will agree, also now have to be given consideration when tourism makes its very welcome return.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, that will be part of the work that we do, and I'm acutely conscious of the importance of the ferries to the islands. We've engaged regularly with the Outer Hebrides tourist organisations, as Dr Allen knows, and with many others on the islands, having holidayed in his constituency myself for most of the last 6 years, I can testify to the great experience that one always has there, especially particularly the ferry journey, which itself is hugely enjoyable, but it has to be there as a service for his constituents as well as visitors.
Gordon Lyndhurst, followed by David Stewart.
Deputy Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, given that tourism accounts for more than 7% of Scottish employment and 5% of our GDP, what clarity can you provide on the detail to Scottish and other travellers and travel agents, whether here or abroad, as to which major tourist sites, attractions and conference centres will be allowed to open on 15th July? and subject to what conditions if the general reopening date does change?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, plainly the fact that we are making this announcement today, Presiding Officer, on 10th of June, preparatory to resumption on the indicative date of the 15th of July, means that there is quite a long lead-in time for us to do this work. And that's partly why the First Minister and the Cabinet have agreed with this approach today, with the exceptional circumstances that the tourism sector has lost basically all its revenue. So to prepare, Visit Scotland will of course be marshalling its resources to make sure that this information is disseminated very widely indeed, and all accommodation providers will be able, as well as restaurants and pubs, to reopen on the 15th of July, as well as visitor attractions. The main element which would be postponed to phase 4 would be events, the coming together of people in large mass gatherings. That's in phase 4, so that won't happen on the 15th of July. So we do have an opportunity, I think, to, as the member says, and he's quite right, to make clear what offering there will be for people who want to come to Scotland on that date. And we will avail ourselves of the time that we have to ensure that that information is widely disseminated.
David Stewart, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One jewel in the crown for tourists is the Highland Wildlife Park at Kincraig. They are desperately looking for two things: early opening, such as is planned in England, and financial support. Will the Cabinet Secretary look urgently at these two matters?
Cabinet Secretary.
I know my colleague Rosanna Cunningham is doing precisely that, looking urgently at financial support. There's a very strong case. I know in England they have accepted that case. There are very strong animal welfare reasons. The Highland Wildlife Park, as I've visited several times with my family, have got a very wide, attractive collection of different species of animals, including very aggressive tiger. And therefore, we need to consider the animal welfare considerations as well as the need for reopening. But I would stress that our judgment and our cautious approach in Scotland is that it's not right just yet to open all visitor attractions and to have people from all over the country travelling to enjoy them. That's the predominant reason, as I mentioned earlier, as to why that opening can't happen sooner than it is. But the lead-in time, the preparation that can take place now, and I hope a positive response from my colleague in relation to financial support, will, I believe, provide sufficient assurance to Highland Wildlife Park and other zoological attractions in Scotland for them to continue.
And Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the announcement of the new task force, and I'd be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary could consider somebody from the boating sector to be involved in that task force. As the Cabinet Secretary will be aware, it's an important sector for my Greenock and Inverclyde constituency, but also for Scotland. Cabinet
Secretary.
Well, Stuart McMillan has championed this issue for several years, and I will give due consideration to that. And I recently had an excellent exchange with the ports and harbours around the country, and a separate one with cruise liner representatives, another really important part of the economy, and assured them that when safe to do so, we will welcome them back to Scotland.
Thank you, and I apologise to Sarah Boyd and to other members who pressed during the course of this, but I did let it run on quite a bit, so it's time to move on to the next item of business. Yes, Ms Smith.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I just want to raise a point of order and seek your guidance. This Parliament is about to debate a very important issue, and I'm sure all parties in this chamber will unite in anti-racism. What I would like to ask, Deputy Presiding Officer, is at 10 to 3 this afternoon, we were notified of a change in the wording to one of the amendments, and subsequently for that to be changed again. Now, as I understand it from my reading of this, it is only a point of technical change and not one of a substantial point. But can I just ask for your guidance about this? Because obviously that was minutes before the debate was due to take place, and potentially that has a big impact on members' approach to it and how we would vote.
Yes, thank you very much. You've been helpful if I had a little notice of this, but I do understand. I understand it's just happened. The presiding officer made a ruling. It was a technical change. It's a manuscript change, and the presiding officer took the view that it was acceptable. It's not always the best way, but it was acceptable. I hope that settles that matter.